What's up, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this session of the BackWoods, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the hilarious of our outdoor adventures. Joining me in the woods today is a zookeeper from the Australia Zoo. His name is Brandon Gifford. My name is Daniel Turnipseed, and you're listening to the BackWoods. All right, guys, joining me over video call, I have Brandon Gifford live from Australia. I just wanted to welcome you to the podcast, first of all. It's awesome to have you on despite our time differences.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Oh, geez, excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. For those of you listening, we have I think it's a 15-hour time difference, something like that. He's in Thursday morning, I'm in Wednesday night. So my uncle has requested that I ask you how the stock market's doing.
Oh,
Because you're technically in the future.
yeah,
Okay.
it's doing good.
It's doing good, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Before we get too far into all of the stories, so the good, the bad, and the hilarious, for the viewers who don't know who you are, would you be able to tell them just a brief summary of who you are, what you do, a generic of who is Brandon Gifford?
Yeah, well, Brandon Gifford, my mates call me Giffo. I'm an Aussie down under. I work at Australia Zoo, but my whole life has pretty well been based around wildlife, like every zookeeper. So I grew up in a small country town called Casino in northern New South Wales,
Mhm.
which was awesome because it's full of snakes and lizards. And so growing up around there, I just spent all my time outdoors, out in the bush, looking for reptiles. And then we took in a lot of wildlife as well to look after. And then I always knew I was going to work with crocs because when I was 5 years old, I saw my first croc feeding up in North Queensland and saw crocs in the wild. And yeah, I had to figure out a way to get to work with them one day. So my whole trajectory has been working towards there. And then now that I've become an adult, I guess it's more than just about crocs. It's about
Mhm.
conservation of all species, yeah, across the globe. So that's really my focus these days. It's awesome working with my reptiles, but yeah, I really want to start helping out with some conservation projects.
All right, and as for working at the zoo, what areas do you work in? Like, what are your animal specialties?
I'm a reptile keeper. So years ago, I started as a what we call as a rover, and they take animals out to meet people every single day. So it's
Mhm.
all about interaction, and you do shows like they've got a lot of shows happening there, and then I went into mammals and birds. And just working my way up to being a reptile keeper, just learning the basics of zookeeping. But I ended up leaving the zoo and went down to the Australian Reptile Park for a reptiles position, and that really built me. Yeah, I got a heck of a lot of experience down there, which yeah, sort of developed my skills as a
Mhm.
keeper, especially when it comes to like the hazardous stuff. Here in Australia, it's very, I guess, strict, and they really want to know that their keepers can work safely alongside these animals. So yeah, I went down there, learned all alongside those, but it was a good experience because it's a bit like being a zookeeper more back in the, I guess, the late 80s or the 90s. That park is it's like one of a kind for Australia. So it was heaps of fun. Like it was just such a good experience. Um, and then I ended up coming back up to the zoo. I chased my girlfriend back up to Australia Zoo and got a reptiles job up here after something like 5 or 6 years. But yeah.
That's pretty cool. My whole dream as a child was to actually be a herpetologist at the local zoo, but just never got to do it because of life. But it's pretty cool
Yeah.
to know that that's the exact field that you're in, because that was like my whole dream as a kid.
Oh, it's incredible. It is good. But yeah, do you still go out looking for your reptiles and by the looks of it all the time? Yeah.
Yeah, we just moved to Florida actually last weekend, and so being able to find a lot more reptiles now.
Florida is, from what I've heard from people that live in Florida, it's like you've got the whole world's wildlife at your
Hmm.
doorstep.
Yep.
You can see literally anything.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff here. But I'm sure there's also just as much to an American in Australia as an Australian would think here. I
Yeah.
actually wanted to ask, there was a meme going around for a while, and it was a son who goes up to his dad and says, "Dad, I got bit by a spider. Am I going to be okay?" And he says, "Son, this is Australia. No." Is that true? Are the spiders there that deadly?
This well, actually, I did do a lot of work with our deadliest spiders, so this is a good topic. Well, I don't think our spiders are as crazy deadly as everyone first thought, and I'm meaning as a whole. Like we have got some very dangerous arachnids. Everyone knows, I'd say these days about funnel web spiders. People have heard of. And the Sydney funnel web spider is just ridiculous when it comes to venom. They've got a venom that pretty well is like designed in a similar way to a brown snake, that it really attacks your central nervous system and shuts you down pretty quick. But they've got what we call an atrotoxin, and an atrotoxin is just cooked. If that gets into you, it's actually the males that possess the greatest toxicity, and it shuts your system down within about 15 minutes. So it's a very, very fast-acting venom and turns all your glands on and speeds them up. So people like start crying and sweating profusely. You actually can bleed out your eyes, and your whole system just cannot cope with the toxin. But as spiders as a whole, though, in Australia, like that sounds ridiculous. They've got a pretty narrow distribution. There's about 46 different species of funnel webs. I believe only the Sydney funnel web and then maybe the northern tree funnel web comes in second for being considered deadly and dangerous. And then, of course, our redback spiders are formidable. They're like your black widow, I guess. Redbacks are another interesting one. You can't milk them because, I used to milk funnel web spiders to create anti-venom. And you just sit there, you get the spider to arc right up, it exposes his little fangs, and then you just get a pipette that has a vacuum on the end of it, and you just suck the venom off his fangs. And you only get tiny little droplets. You have to do it for hours and hours each week. It's a huge process. But for redbacks, they actually have to take it out of the spider. Their fangs are too small, which is unfortunate. But that's literally the only way they can save people's lives. So it's a shocker. But redbacks are probably the more common one to come into like interaction with because there's so many of them all over the place. But then again, you don't hear of many people getting bitten by redback because you get taught from when you're really little never to pick them up. I might have ignored that. But we definitely like need the anti-venom for those spiders as well. Like it's not as deadly dangerous as a funnel web. Like when I was a little kid, I thought redbacks were, you get bitten by them, it's all over. And when you are a kid, it's more true, I guess. But when you're an adult looking at what happens, the symptoms are there. They're deadly dangerous, but not nearly as fast acting as the funnel web. Like there was a bloke I ran into down south when I was working with the spiders, and he was telling me he got bitten by a redback and he stayed in bed for 3 days of nausea and vomiting. And then he was over it. And I was like, why didn't you go to the hospital, mate? They could have given him a little shot of anti-venom and he would have been up and going like pretty quick. But yeah, the spiders though, like there's some hectic ones, but yeah, not all of them are deadly. The one that's funny is the bird-eating spider. Everyone used to think they were deadly dangerous, and they have got venom. And one of my mates got whacked by one. They're incredibly painful. You swell right up. But I don't believe they're deadly at all. I think that's a bit of a misconception where, yes, I think they're still studying it too. But
yeah. And the redback spiders, I think, if it's the one I'm thinking of, I think they were recently introduced into Florida as well. They're about maybe 3/4 or a half-inch head to butt, and they got 2 red spots, one on their abdomen, one on the back of their head or their torso. Yeah, we saw one just the other day, and my uncle was telling me, he's like, yeah, the new threatening thing in Florida is those redback spiders. You don't want to get bit by one. So I didn't know they were from Australia. I just thought it was a new species that was introduced.
Yeah. Well, and that's ridiculous. That is literally, we've had those for years. They're very similar to the black widow, and they don't create much of they create a little bit of a web at the top, but they mainly jot those little, you probably already know, those little silken strands down, and the insect comes along and hits those and it drags them up. They eat, like this to give you an idea of their venom, they can kill an eastern brown snake here in Australia, not an adult, but this is literally our deadliest snake. The little hatchlings at about this big. You get sent a video or a photo every so often of one of them caught up in their web. But it's like all spiders, their venom's pretty well just designed to turn whatever it is into a soup on the inside and slurp it out. So it's pretty good. But the thing I was going to say about the difference between funnel webs and redbacks as well is that when you look at a funnel web spider, you see the size of its fangs, or a bird eating
Mhm.
spider. They deliver that just like the way snakes do, just a little bit better than the redbacks just get a bit under the skin. So you get
Mhm.
more sort of skin issues with redbacks too.
Yeah, well, that's good to know because apparently they're around here, and we saw one just the other day. It is a possibility. It is a different spider than I'm thinking, but my uncle did say they're like a black widow. They just have the extra red dot on their back. So I,
That's
I
what they
was,
look like.
yeah,
You're getting everything over there.
yeah. It's kind of scary with how much stuff.
Yeah.
Just we moved in last weekend, and we've already seen. I know they're not like deadly, but we've already seen like 8 different species of caterpillars alone in our backyard. And I was like, I didn't know there were
Oh,
this many different species of hairy caterpillars, and they're all over. And some of them, they're like, you can't touch them because they'll inject their hairs into your skin. And I have 2
yeah.
toddlers and a newborn, so I'm like, well, how do I
Oh,
keep them from picking up the caterpillars?
that's so stressful. How crazy is it once you get into the insects and like the invertebrates? The
Uh huh.
people that study those and know all of their scientific names are the biggest legends. I can't believe how many there are.
Hmm.
Like there's like a new species discovered every day in Australia.
Well, I'm from Arizona. I lived in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, for the last 2 years, and then I moved here. But grew up, born and raised Arizona, and so we were used to the classic venomous reptiles and insects.
You
But
are.
there was only a select few. There was rattlesnakes, sidewinders, there was scorpions, there was centipedes, there was black
Oh,
widows. But moving to Florida, there's like 1,000% more. And so every day I'm seeing a new insect. They're crawling on my leg. They're in my backyard. I'm like, what is this? Is this deadly? Do I need to research this?
oh. So you would have seen Gila monsters growing up, did you?
I never
Ah,
saw them in the wild. I only saw them in research centers. But my
yeah,
uncle, as against the law as it is, they were
yeah,
rebellious when they were younger, so they would go out and catch them. But he
yeah.
said, of course, but he said one of his buddies got bit by one, a baby, and instead of going to the hospital, because what do you do when you go to a hospital after getting bit by a protected species? And they're like, what were you doing handling the protected species? He said about 3 weeks later, he saw him and his arm was swollen like a giant sausage. And he was like, you need to go to the hospital. And he was like, well, I can't because they'll arrest me because I was handling a protected species. So he just dealt with it. And his arm eventually went back to normal, but it was a deadly situation for him at least.
That is incredible. Far out. That is so funny. I had that exact fear like growing up. I used to be like, what if I get bitten by this? If I was catching a snake and I'd be like, what do you do? Do you go to the hospital or you don't? I don't think they care as much in Australia. Um, like it's pretty hard for them to turn a blind eye to someone
Hmm.
killing a snake, but then you picking it up and moving it out of your backyard
Yeah.
is illegal. I don't think they get as involved. But yeah, if we had yellow monsters, they definitely would be getting up us for picking them up.
Hmm.
There's something
Yeah,
about
it's
lizards.
I've always wanted to see one, but I never had the pleasure of seeing one in person. But
Ah,
almost all of my family members have, which is the hilarious thing, and they're not the reptile lovers. I'm like,
but you've seen rattlesnakes, so you've seen
yes,
sidewinders.
yeah, I've seen. We used to
That
actually
makes
go
me
out.
sick.
My uncle and me and my brother, we used to go out and we used to hunt them because you can sell their hides and stuff. We tried eating them, but it's really hard to get them to taste well, just because of what they are.
Yeah,
But now that I've gotten
yeah,
older, I don't think I would do that because that was more like 10, 11-year-old me being like, oh, this is so cool. Let's go hunt rattlesnakes. But now I've learned
yeah,
like a respect for these animals. And I'm like, I don't want to go
yeah,
out and just kill them. If anything, I want to photograph them. I want to see them in their natural habitat. Um,
yeah,
but we also had the sidewinders, which are super quick rattlesnakes. We used to see those all the time. And then in our traveling, we've seen like cottonmouths. We've seen 3 of those in one little den. Not a whole ton of vipers in our travels, but we have seen some. And I have my snake hook, and I really want to go in and get my snake handler's license just so I can handle them properly and not be like on YouTube handling a venomous snake and not be trained for it. So I try not
yeah,
to do that too much on camera. I'll do it when we're not filming, but I picked up
yeah,
a baby copperhead in the past, but it doesn't go on my YouTube channel because I don't want to be a bad influence on the children who are watching. But okay, enough talk about snakes and spiders because we got to get to the actual stories. Let's go into the good. So the good stories of why you're a zookeeper, why you love reptiles, and why you enjoy staying in this profession.
Yeah. There's a lot of good. I guess growing up with a passion for wildlife, I can't picture doing something else. And there's a whole stack of reasons to be into wildlife at the moment. Like for all the good, there is all the bad. But I tell you what, there's a heck of a lot more good than there is bad in
Mm-hmm.
wildlife. And the animals just themselves each and every day are constantly teaching you something. I've always said that wildlife will never be something I could ever retire from. Like I reckon you can do wildlife till literally the day you die, and constantly be learning. No one will ever know enough about
Mm-hmm.
wildlife to sit back and be like, okay, I've learned it all. There's just too much. Like, and even just dealing with Australian wildlife, there's too much. Let alone every time I wrap my head around a new scientific name for a snake, it changes 2 weeks later. But the good is literally every single day I get to be around young people and teaching them about wildlife and seeing their eyes light up because I guess they haven't had life hit them yet, and people either discourage them from being around animals or teach them the fear. I know Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki is a massive scientist out here. He's very famous in Australia at least, and he does a lot of our radio stuff. And he was talking to me about this a while back. He's just the smartest bloke, but he said he was involved in a study with kids when he was a doctor because he absolutely like specialized in children, loves children, and he was saying that they have to learn that fear of a snake or a spider. And someone teaches them it; they're not born with it. And you can see it because when you deal with the little ones, they just completely light up when they deal with one of our animals, any of our animals, I guess, and they ask you so many good questions about it. So getting to help them learn about our animals and realize that there doesn't need to be this filter, even if something's dangerous, you don't have to hate it. But then I guess going back to that old job, one of my proudest things I never ever expected to be a part of was the anti-venom program. And that's for snakes and spiders because that's something very tangible where you literally you go milk a tiger snake every single day and you don't really think about it because it's just your job. And then one day someone comes up to you and goes, I got bitten by a tiger snake and I was going to die and I got anti venom and that saved my life. And that where the only down there, that was the only facility that would actually milk the snakes to get anti venom. So it would hit you hard. So there was that positive to it. But then as far as conservation goes, far out, like Australia is not leading the way in conservation. We are like one of the worst countries for at least annihilating wildlife in its habitat. Like I was just last week out in the Brigalow Belt, which is about it's 20% of Australia's land mass, and 80% of its brigalow trees have just been cleared. So there's not much left. So I guess the positive that comes out of it is every time you see something like that and it affects me deeply, you can talk to people about it and you've got a platform to actually share about these things and then also get involved in projects that are day to day. I love people. I reckon people always say to me, oh, I got into zookeeping or I got into wildlife because I can't stand people. I hate people. I don't want to deal with them. And I always think that is, I feel like the job I could think of to do if you hate people is to be, especially if you want to out west and just go be an ecologist somewhere and you will get to deal with the animals out in the bush and not have to deal with people. But as far as zookeeping goes, that's why I love it is because you are around people, you're dealing with people every single day, and you got to love people as much as you love animals as well. So it is quite an interesting job for that, but you get to learn so much about people in doing that. You meet people from literally every corner of the globe.
Yeah, and that sounds awesome. Just being
Yeah,
able to be an influence on people the way you are. I know there's a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of children that light up when they see these things, and I understand the concept of somebody has to teach them too, because my kids alone, they'll go in the backyard and be like, Dad, I'm gonna go find a snake, and I'm like, no, you're not. Yeah, it's not unless Dad's out there with you, because I don't want you just grabbing a snake. That's not gonna happen. But it's awesome to be able to teach the younger generation about this wildlife and what to touch and what not to touch and what's safe to touch, and just be able to introduce them to this stuff. My kids alone, in our backyard, there's a nature reserve. And so we were able to go out there this past week, and there's gopher tortoises, which are listed as protected.
Oh,
And they're just naturally occurring out in these fields. And so you can go out and see their dens, and they're just walking around grazing in the field. And I'm like, what a privilege, because their numbers have dropped, I think, in the last 20 years by 60%. And so there's no guarantee that they'll be here by the time my kids become 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. And so to be able to go out and see them while they're still here is really cool to do, and just be able to teach the younger generation. And I know the zoo itself does a lot of rehabilitation of species and stuff that's becoming on the endangered side. So that's really cool on your guys' part too. Just being able to raise these things up and
oh,
introduce them to people that might not be able to see them again.
they have done an absolute phenomenal job. Yeah, both institutions I worked for have got their own Aussie native projects, but I tell you what, what you're talking about with the wildlife hospital itself up here in Queensland, it's like the greatest one in Australia. They just pump through the wildlife going through there that would not stand a chance. And then they've got some protected reserves as well. Like they had just got it down pat, like how to do conservation. It's really good.
All right, and on the talk of animals in zoo, out of zoo, captivity, what is your favorite experience with an animal, and what animal was it?
Yeah, so my favorite animal experience was definitely finding my first fear snake or inland taipan, because that's the classic most venomous snake in the world. That's what every kid that's into reptiles dreams of finding. And for me, it was quite a hard one to find. Like, I know a bloke who looked for them for 25 years, and when you watch the docos growing up, you'd expect them to be pretty straightforward. You go to their right habitat and you'll get them, but they're a boom or bust snake. So in Australia, we've got a few of those where they're spending most of their lives underground. For a close example to them, I don't know how much time fear snakes spend underground, but there's another species that goes underground, and it's called like the Woma python, which you've probably seen over there. They're a popular pet in Australia now. But Womas, they spend 80% of their lives underground. So this is a pretty similar example where, fear snakes are in black soil habitat. They're in cracking soil. So you go out west from where I am right now. It's 15 hours west, and you start to hit these this real arid area that does get flooded in the wet seasons, and the water drains down from northern Australia when the wet season hits and hits that floodplain, and then it dries up. But where they sit in the cracking soil is it's incredibly difficult to see them, because when I first started going out there, we were in the El Nino, so everything was
Yeah.
dry, it was hot. They weren't getting those wet seasons. It was in the worst drought in recorded history for Australia for that region. So you'd go out there and you'd see other things, but you wouldn't see fear snakes. So I spent over all up 6 weeks. I think most of the majority of that by myself, just driving up and down their habitat looking for them. So it's quite a journey to get out to them, and then you look for them, and couldn't find them, which was not what I expected. And then uh, it was 2 years ago that we got our La Nina, finally broke the El Nino, and so we got a whole bunch of rain up north. I just had a feeling like for sure these fear snakes would be out then, and then I heard about in Western New South Wales the rats and mice were plaguing out there. So I thought up in Western Queensland, the rats and mice would be plaguing too. And what that means is that their specialized diet is they're pretty well just targeting this species of rat called the long-haired rat that
Mm-hmm.
are under the soil as well. And I thought, far out, if the rats are booming, then those ones will be for sure. And got out there, took one of my mates out for 5 days. And we got out there, and the first night I got out on the plains, and there were thousands of rats running over our feet. They were just everywhere.
Jeez.
They'd run up your leg, they'd run all over the shop, and then a whole bunch of other species of mammals I wanted to see, like a very cute little Australian carnivorous marsupial called the kawaii, which is a very hard one to see. Saw that. But anyway, the fear snake come a few days after that. Late in the afternoon, I was actually up on top of the vehicle because you can see out better overlooking what these plains. and it was literally right on sunset. We're on this property and could just see this huge fierce snake sitting out just across the plains, just off to the side. And I just couldn't believe it. And our signal was I would hit the top of the ute if I saw one. And I just belted the ute, and my mate had a heart attack. And I dove off and ran and got it. And we were just screaming and so excited, and filmed and photographed him. And we met some other mates out there who ended up starting to look for the same snake. And the next morning, we all went out, and they turned down one road left and we turned right. And when they went left, there were two fierce snakes mating, which they sent someone to come and alert us to it. And we went back, and we just missed the mating itself, but we found the male and got to photograph him. But fierce snakes, looking for them is by far my favourite animal interaction out in the wild. Like, unbeatable. But close second would be catching my first little crocs as well. But, yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to the bad stories. So obviously you used to handle venomous snakes. So even if it's not like a deadly story, what are some stories in your past experiences that have been scary, dangerous, or in that realm of stories?
I've yeah, so some bad stories. I've had a couple. One in particular was I was with my girlfriend out at Mount Isa, and or near Mount Isa, it's in northwestern Queensland, and there's two massive lakes out there, and one of them is a few hours from nowhere. It's called Lake Mary Kathleen, and when you walk around the edge of it, there's olive pythons at night sitting on the rocky escarpments around it, and then during the day there's at night as well, you can see them. There's freshwater crocodiles in the water. I took her there to look for them. One of my mates had alerted me to that spot, but I didn't look it up. I just sort of found where to go to Lake Mary Kathleen, but didn't look up the lake at all. And we got there right on dark. So when we got there, we looked around, shone the torch around, and saw the edge of the lake and thought we were in a very small area. So I started us walking along it, and we got an hour into the walk, and we're like, oh, do we want to turn around and go back to the ute? And then I just stupidly said, oh, no, it's probably quicker to just keep going, and we'll wind around to the ute this way. And we got 2 hours in, and it was the exact same thing. But at this point, all the crocs are up, so you could see eye shine everywhere. And I was getting very excited, but Leash was sort of wanting to go back to the ute. And I said, well, we can turn around and walk back. And she goes, well, we've just walked 2 hours. Let's keep going this way, and then we'll be back at the ute around the end of the lake soon. Like, surely the lake's nearly over, because we could see this other edge. And this other edge we were shining across with a torch was not where the ute was. It was a completely different section of lake. So then we kept walking and walking, and it was going past hours. And we literally got to like 9 o'clock at night. We were still there. And then 10, 11, 12, and we're still walking around this lake. And at this point, we're going up over every type of habitat you could think of around this one lake. And Leash is absolutely terrified of heights. And this is her first outback experience with me. And we got to this point at 1 a.m. where there was probably closer to 1:30. There was a rock face, it was pretty well a cliff just going up with some edges to it. And this is like at the peak of her being terrified and tired of just being out. And she considers us lost. I reckon if you're around a lake, you're not lost, because you're going to come to your ute eventually. But we didn't know how big it was, so I was starting to wonder if we're going to be there for a day or two, because I could not remember what the size of this lake was. And we got up onto this. I got to this rocky escarpment, and I ended up climbing up it, figuring out how to get us both up it, come back down, and then taught her how to rock climb up this thing. It was virtually 2 a.m. by the time we were at the top of that. And she cried the whole way up, and I had my hand on her back the whole way up. And she was saying later that the entire way up that cliff, she was thinking about the second we get away from that lake, she's getting onto a plane and flying back home and leaving the trip. When we got to the top, there was the olive python at 2 a.m. It was just sitting there at the top of the cliff, which I was very excited about. I was very, very happy, and she couldn't care less. When she saw it, she sat down and cried. So I gave her a big hug and just talked her through it. And I really told her how, like, talked us through the situation. That it's not that bad. It's not that dangerous. It's fine. Which is a new experience for me, having to talk someone else through that. Usually I get into these
Yeah.
situations by myself. And then we photographed the olive python, even though she didn't really want to. And then we caught a couple of little crocs on our way around later. And it wasn't until 7:30 the next morning that we reached the ute. So we went from 6 p.m. till 7:30 a.m. walking around one big
Ooh.
lake, and she hated every minute of it. But yeah, that was an incredible experience. So that was one of the bad ones for me as far as my relationship goes. And the other one was that trip we were going out into Uluru, and my air conditioning in my ute failed. So we're out at Ayers Rock, Uluru, literally the hottest place in Australia, in the middle of summer.
Oh.
It was burning hot. So for me, that was a low point, driving around in 40-degree temperatures. But other things that have happened, I was doing probably my next experience would be I was doing a show once, a wildlife show, and I had a rhinoceros iguana from over in the Caribbean,
Yeah.
and his name was Chaos. And so I was talking about him to the crowd, and just as I was talking, I tripped over a rock and sent him back into myself. And this adult rhino iguana, his head's like this, and he just went bang straight on my
Oh.
mouth. And I looked at the bloke in front of me who was just pale. And I was like, "Oh, he bit me on the face, didn't he?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, he bit you, mate." And I was like, "Is there blood?" And he's like, "There's a lot of blood." And then he did not look impressed. And I was like, "Oh, well, we'll keep going because otherwise Chaos wins." And so we just talked about him a little bit more and then put him back, and they gave him a clap. And a lady ran down and gave me baby wipes. And so then I still had to do the alligator and the Burmese python for the rest of the show. So I was holding baby wipes while I wrangled the other two things, and that was a nightmare. And then when I got out of the show, they put a band-aid on it, and I got up top, and my old boss Tim, come up to me, and they'd all heard about this, and they had a look, and they wanted to see what had happened. And so we pulled the band-aid off, and I thought it was just gonna be like a little split lip, but it was like this huge amount of cuts all the
Ooh.
way down here, and I had to go to the hospital and get 8 stitches. So that's probably one of the bad ones that happened in a zoo setting. But yeah,
Ooh.
it was pretty funny though.
Yeah, well, now that you mention going back on it, it's funny. But at the time, I
Yeah.
guarantee you, it was not. It's the type of story you're like, I can talk about it now. But
Yeah.
that's scary. That is scary. I've been bit on the lip by a duck, and that's like the most dangerous thing I've ever been bit by. I can't imagine. I can't imagine being bit by a rhinoceros iguana, because those things are fierce looking in general, and if they're anything like a big lizard, they could bite your lip off cleanly with no issue. So
Yeah.
that's scary, man.
Oh,
I don't know what I would do in that
yeah.
situation.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult trying to talk and still talk and then have heaps of blood come out. It was uncomfortable, but it's pretty yeah, I think the audience loved it though. They love seeing failure, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to that story. Whenever you're handling the chaos, do you take any mental notes like don't trip, just make sure you don't stumble?
Yeah. Well, Chaos, we worked for ages together, and I could actually kiss him on the head. That's how good he was. That's not what happened when that happened, but he was pretty good. I just given him a fright. So after that day, he was a little bit naughtier. Like he just had a bit of an attitude, and so I had to work really hard to get him back to it. But then I left the park and went to the zoo, and we've just got him up at the zoo. So I've literally just started working with him again. And he like is crazy. He's a nightmare rhino iguana. I reckon anyone that works with rhino iguanas or has met the male rhino iguanas in particular when they're young, they've got like this spike of heat and excitement about them where they just want to kill everything. Some of them, unless you can feed them hibiscus flowers enough and calm them down. But yeah, Carlos is definitely at the other end of the spectrum for how intense he is. He's literally chaos. They gave him the right name.
Lives up to that name
But
very
yeah.
well. All right. Well,
Oh, perfectly.
let's go ahead and switch into the hilarious story. Since that was sort of a bad and funny story, let's go ahead and switch straight over into funny stories. So in your experiences working at the zoo or going out and finding these reptiles on your own, What are some of the funny stories, or even if it was a bad story turned funny, what are some of those stories you have?
Oh, far out. It's it's pretty crazy. Well, there's so many different ones that have happened. I reckon one of the funnier ones was me and my mate Jake were actually in Coober Pedy in South Australia looking for fierce snakes, but in a different spot where you can find them. And we just done laps and laps with each one of us on the side of the vehicle. And and he literally, if we saw something, we would do the same thing, hit the vehicle, the person slows down and stops, and then you snake. And he went up and just hit the side of the vehicle. And as I was braking, he jumped off a bit quick, and he ended up going off way too fast and just stacked himself on the ground and hit his head and ended up splitting his head, which wasn't funny. But the whole part of it was we were starting to freak out and be like, "Far out! You've just split your head. We're in Coober Pedy. This is a nightmare." And it's the very start of the trip, so we didn't know what was going to happen the rest of the trip. If that was like the second day of our trip, and he split his head, so we put a towel on it, and he was an absolute champion. We went into Coober Pedy, and I just said to him, I was like, "Look, mate." I was trying to make him feel better. He was like, "It'll be 20 minutes, 5 stitches at the medical center, no worries." And we got there, and it was 20 minutes and 5 stitches straight in the head, and we could not stop laughing because it's just sort of, he knew I just said it and made it up, but it's exactly what happened. So that was a classic for just how that worked out that day. But funny stuff that happens in the bush happens all the time. But trying to think of exact examples. I remember one night I had like literally no sleep. I didn't sleep for 2 nights up until this next night, and we found this little frog. And it was the little crucifix frog here in Australia, which is like this big, and they're the cutest little things, and they're wild looking units. And I literally been looking for him for ages and finally found him this one night. I think it was actually, sorry, it was in the morning. It was like 3 in the morning. And when he was hopping along, I was trying to photograph him and he would not sit still. And I was so sleep deprived. And I finally found this frog that I always wanted to photograph. And I kept following him around. And I just went into this fit where I was just yelling and upset and just had this literally this, I can't believe I even did it, but this tantrum over this frog not sitting still, and my mates just lost it. And so now they tell everyone that story about I was just jumping up and down and couldn't even deal with it. And I left him. I was just like, "You go, mate." And got defeated by this little frog after all the years of photographing all these snakes and things. So yeah, I got defeated by this tiny little fella. But it was the cutest thing ever too that happened. It's pretty funny. I reckon frogs are some of the toughest animals to photograph some days. But yeah, no, there's definitely been some crazy stuff. One of our these people we know, I was up in Cape York Peninsula, and I was again with my girlfriend Alicia, and so this is a second trip. She's been out on little trips with me, but second big trip she's been into the somewhere remote with me, and we went up looking for grub there. We just towed this bloke who'd broken down off the side of the road, and he was this eccentric dude. He was missing fingers, and he had no teeth, and he's this wild bushy that had been out there for years, and he'd broken down in a car that I didn't think could drive anyway. Like, it was no wonder it broke down. It had no windows. The seats had no seat on them. It was just the frame of the metal inside. Like, everything was cooked. He doesn't have mirrors. Like, this car had no mirrors. And so I had to, I got out and Leash was like, "Oh, don't stop, don't stop," when we saw him. And I thought it could be a trap because sometimes people up there in particular do try to trap you with a setting like that and rob you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just had a feeling. I was like, "No, we got to help this bloke." And I got out, asked him what was wrong. He said he needed a tow. So I went and got my strap from my vehicle and put it onto his. And I got into his vehicle because I was like, "There's no way I trust this bloke driving behind our ute just in case." Like, just looked like a wild unit. So I was hoping he wouldn't, because I was worried he'd crash into our vehicle when we were towing. And then I had to direct Leash how to tow, and she towed us all the way into this only little place that's there is a boat ramp in this area. Like, it's very remote, and it's where other people might be. There's a little house that doubles as a cafe as well. And we went and we're driving along there, and Leash towed us the whole way. And just as she gets to the cafe, the strap broke, and we just glided up and pulled up outside the house perfectly. And I thought that was classic. And then got out, and we noticed another bloke was there, and we sort of clocked him because there's no one else in the area. And I said to Leisha, let's just go to the beach and have drinks at this local beach, which was 15 minutes away, instead of staying where we were. And when we drove through the bush, this vehicle followed us the whole way. This bloke that was there, he got in his vehicle and he followed us the whole way to this little car park, I guess, at the beach. And we sort of noticed him and thought, oh yeah, he's just going to the beach as well. But then he just sat there in his vehicle next to us, and we thought, oh, this is strange. And we started to get a little bit uneasy about it, especially because my girlfriend's there. I don't know, just heightened senses. And then we sort of noticed he was looking at us and watching us, and he seemed to want us to talk to him, but I gave him a wave and said hello. But then I thought, oh, maybe we should just leave after all the excitement of the last bloke. So and that last bloke, he was a whole nother story for personality. Far out, I've never met anyone like him. And so yeah, we decided to go back to our campsite deep into the rainforest where you find the green pythons, which is another 45 minutes away. So we got in the vehicle and it got right behind us and followed us the whole way. So then we start doing turns down these roads, and we got into our campsite and we turned back out of it and we went the other way. And this car is following us for ages, and it was ridiculous. Like, it was right up our tail. We couldn't shake it. And so now at this point, my girlfriend's just freaking out, and I'm really uneasy because I'm like, oh, we are getting stalked through the bush, and we couldn't understand it at all. And we ended up packing up we got back to camp after we managed to do a few turns, and he left, and we went back quickly. We packed up our campsite and left, and we were telling people like that's the craziest thing that happened.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, this story had gotten around, and it turned out to be a bloke that found a green python and was going to show it to us. And and the whole thing, he was actually waiting for me at the beach. He was in his car waiting, and he wasn't sure whether he should get out and introduce himself, if he was going to look like a creep or not. And so he was having that debate with himself while we were there getting creeped out. And then he ended up deciding when we left he should show us the green python, so he took off after us. But because we now think we're getting stalked, we wouldn't slow down, and it just become this whole misunderstanding. But far out, that was a funny one to talk to him about once he heard the story, and he was so petrified, mortified that that's what our interpretation of it was. So he really got back in contact with us, and we talked over wildest days to have my girlfriend up in the bush. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh gosh. There's stories that I have. I won't go into them, but of being followed by people. And it's the worst because you don't know if they're following you to follow you. And they're like, take 3 left-hand turns. If they're still following you, then they're stalking you. And I'm like, well, what if they live on the same road? You don't know.
And you feel like a psychopath as the person that's getting out of their way. You're like, oh, geez, I felt terrible. Especially once I found out I knew who he was. He had a bigger beard and a lot more hair than I remembered. But yeah, there's a fair few of those. Geez, I'm going to kick myself after this for funny stories, though, because we've had so many. Like, one of the best that I can think of was like even just the little things that happen with your mates on trips. Like we were looking for we went on this trip where literally they wanted me to find them a bearded dragon, a what we call a Burton's legless lizard, and the other one was just a carpet python. And we're going to the Brigalow Belt where you can find womas, which are like the holy grail of snakes. They're like striking gold. And all these other reptiles that are phenomenal. And they gave me the easiest list of things, the most common things you could find on the face of the earth. And so I thought this trip will be a breeze. And on the way up, we found a woma. Literally at 4 a.m., we were driving towards our campsite, and there was a woma on the road, and I was screaming. And they really, I think they underestimated how hard it is to find a woma. But yeah, the next day though, we went looking for this bearded dragon, and we got bogged. And there's the funniest video I reckon I've ever made with them is we were bogged and we put down these. Do you have Max tracks in America? Surely.
Oh,
Like we
we
put
probably
down
do. What are they? What do they look like?
they're like these orange, they're like an orange sort of like plate. They're they're pretty long, and you just put them under the tire and drive over, and they've got like a grip over the top of them. And you put one under each of the front tires if you're bogged, and hopefully they can get you out. Like you can, it just
We
allows you to, instead of putting rocks and logs under, you put these, we call them max tracks under the tires. But
I think most of the people here in America would just have a winch on the front of the truck. I
yeah,
think that's what we all
yeah,
resort to.
yeah, resort to the way. That's good. Well, yeah, well, this you definitely. He didn't have a winch, and so we used the max tracks. And when the thing with max tracks is once you use them, they sink down into the mud because you're driven over them, so they're buried. And it was just the funniest video because I wanted to do a video to all the guys about how to get max tracks out from under mud, and it was just supposed to be this real like showing them how easy it is. Oh, I was trying to make it look like a difficult process, but it's really easy. And then when I went down to this max tracks that's under the mud, it's usually the simplest thing. Like you just pull it out. I grabbed it and I could not pull it out. And I kept talking about it, and I was just deep in the mud. Like I'd been up to my waist in the mud trying to get these things out. And then eventually my other mate Zach just walks in, grabs the other end of it with two fingers and just lifts the whole thing out. And it was just the funniest video I've ever made because I looked like the biggest strongo when I was trying to show off. It was so good. Or even being out in the bush with your mates, it's good for thinking. I love being out in the bush or the outback, just processing and getting away from all the noise. Because particularly in our job, my life, I just talk and talk and talk. But you get out there and it's silent. But when you go with your mates, it's when all the funny stuff happens.
Yeah, I know. We have some of our funniest stories when it's just me, my brother, and my uncle out doing stuff. Mainly because we all know each other really well, and so the slightest things, like we know each other's quirks, and so we are expecting these things to happen. And my quirk is incredible clumsiness. I'm always pretty much going to injure myself or fall in a river or get stuck somewhere while we're out doing stuff. And just, I think it was 2 days ago, I was trying to catch an North American racer, and I've never caught one before. These are the first time I've actually seen them in person, and so I'm like going gung-ho, just bushwhacking through these thick bushes around the house, and they're covered in like poison ivy and poison oak, but at this point I don't care. I'm just like, I want to catch the snake. And I fell backwards on a log, and the log had a little limb or something sticking out, and it like sliced up my back, and it looked like I got whipped with a whip. And the only other injury I got was a little scrape on my hand, but clumsiness is my downfall, and we always end up with hilarious stories from our trips.
I was just going to say there was a last weekend. Very quickly, we were out looking for brown snakes, and we come across the king brown, which is actually a black snake. And so this mulga snake was crossing out in the middle of the road, and we're in the very before we wrap up. Was that we were literally out looking for brown snakes last week, and so we're out probably 7 hours west out in the outback. So Mick, he'd slammed on the brakes. We drifted down the road for quite a stretch, probably like 30 meters. There was a cloud of dust. It was going off, and I dove out the other side of my door, and I was just excited that I had the snake on my side and not his, because he would have caught it first otherwise. And he was yelling out like while we were drifting down the road, because it went for a while before it was slowing down enough to get out. And he was going, sorry. And I was like, mate, no worries at all. And I dove out, caught the snake, and he come up and he's like, I wasn't apologizing for the snake. I was apologizing for the car, because it was my new Prado that we thought we were going to bust up. But it was pretty funny because we're not used to having good brakes out in the bush. Like usually You put on
Yeah.
the brakes and the vehicle goes for a little bit and it doesn't stop on the spot. Whereas this thing just locked up and we just went flying and sent it. And it was a classic story. But yeah, that was one that literally happened the other day. So I thought that was good. But yeah.
It's always fun using new cars to do stuff like that. We just bought a
Oh,
brand new vehicle, and
yeah.
my wife's first response was, "No, you're not going herping in our brand new van," because she
Yeah.
knows I would probably go out and tear it up.
Oh, you can't. That's classic. Oh, yeah. The second you get anything nice out herping, you'll ruin it, won't you?
I have some nice leather dress shoes that I've ruined. I have so many pairs of pants and shirts that I've ruined that are meant for like church. They're church apparel. Why am I wearing it out here? But
Yeah.
I, I don't think twice about it. I'm going out to catch something. I don't care what I'm wearing.
Yeah. And most of the stuff would be straight after church. It's like when you're
Uh,
most dressed up, that's when you'll see the best thing to go catch.
yep, that's pretty much how everything works.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I've destroyed my clothes. You don't make enough money as a zookeeper to get the stuff that you need to do what you do out in the bush.
Yeah, you destroy everything, literally
You
everything.
literally destroy everything.
I just thought I would mention real quick too before we end the podcast. I'm in a forest that's a bear reserve right now. And so this whole time I've been like super paranoid because it's sun setting right now, which is like they're going to be out and be active and start getting into stuff. And before we started the podcast, I'm sitting here and I hear a loud rustle. There's like a barbed wire fence right next to me. And I hear a loud rustle in the bushes. And I'm like, what is that? Because I'm in a bear forest. And I stand up and look over and I see the big back of something black and hairy. And it's going through all these low palms. And I'm like, oh no, is that a bear? And so I stand there and my heart like starts pounding and I'm like, oh my gosh, because I just set up all my equipment. I'm like, what do I do? And then it comes out and it's just a massive cow. It's like, what are the odds?
But
That
that's
it's just
crazy.
it just came up and stared at me.
Right now, I am so jealous. Do you see many bears?
Not at the moment. I've only been out here twice since we moved here. But there's signs all over the place for black bear crossings, and there's photos of this area, like the reviews of the area I'm in that have photos of black bears just taking a stroll. So it's a really cool area to be in.
Ah, yeah, that's what's funny about Australia is everyone always talks about it being like deadly and dangerous, and I feel like the wildlife here is so easy to live alongside. Like your crocs, as long as you're not next to the water, you're fine, or in the water, you're fine. Whereas you got so many terrestrial predators in the States that it is crazy, like where you live. It's awesome. That's just nuts. The fact that you think about where a bear is during your day, like, oh, I want to have that problem one day. I've got to come over and see.
It's a fun problem to have because our trash can at our house didn't have this experience in Texas. It's bear proof. It's got a lock on the front of it and everything. And I was like, I've never had a trash can with a lock, a bear proof lock on it. You got to like twist a knob on the front and then the lid will open for you. And I've never had to experience that before.
That is nuts. Yeah, that's awesome. That is crazy.
Right where we live is like center of a bunch of nature reserves. And it just so happens to be right down the road from one of the clearest natural springs in Florida. And so we went down to the natural spring and I'm walking around and I look over and one of the palm trees has 3 patterned slashes all up the trunk of the palm tree, as a large cat does to mark their territory. And I was like, wow, it was just like a smack in the face. Like there could be a Florida panther here, there could be a mountain lion here, and it's just in the woods somewhere. It's marking its territory for a reason. And so I just sat there looking at it like in shock. Like, this is 2 miles from my house. I could have some big predatory cat show up in my backyard and not even realize it.
That is crazy. That is awesome. Oh, wow. Yeah, you wouldn't ever have that problem in Texas, hey? That's epic. Yeah, I really want to go to Florida. Do you see many alligators?
Yes, actually right next to me in the river, there's a baby alligator. My uncle threw a crawdad trap in and it came up to the crawdad trap. We're thinking it's because of the meat that we had in it, but
Yeah.
yeah, they're all over the place. All over the place out here.
Oh, that's epic. Oh, how cute are they? They're awesome. Yeah, I
Mhm.
love alligators so much. They're funny as like when you're working around them. I guess they're a lot. I guess they're a lot easier to work around with than the male crocs in
Mhm.
some ways. but they're so dramatic. Like, I just think they're the most dramatic, over the top things on the face of the earth. Like, you'll just be doing anything, and one of the big boys will just sit there and start hissing at you and rumble. And you go, far out. They see people get in and out of their enclosures all the time. Like, for some of them, for the last 40 years, someone has jumped in with them and scooped something or moan on something, and they're just as dramatic as if it's the first day. I love alligators so much. They're ridiculous. They're so cute too. Just their big eyes, like they're on another level for cuteness. But yeah.
One thing I'm jealous of for you guys is you can handle these animals. We can't here in the States. Alligators are strictly protected. You're not allowed to touch them. You're not allowed to do anything with them. And we were
True.
we were laughing because we just saw a sign in the reserve next to my house, which I've never seen before, and it says not to feed the alligators hallucinogenics. So apparently people out here have been feeding them shrooms and getting the alligators all whacked out.
What?
And we were just laughing. We're like, who was out here feeding them shrooms?
How is that a sign? What the heck?
There's some weird signs out here. The wordage, I can't say it on here because it is inappropriate, but they essentially say do not touch the alligators. It's federal law. You can't touch them. But the word they use in normal terms would be like a guy doing something to a child is the word they use for it. And I don't want to use the word because I know it'll get censored on my podcast, but that's what they put on the signs. And I'm like, why is that the word they chose? Like, you could just say don't touch the alligators and don't feed the alligators. You don't have to be that descriptive. Yeah. And every national park has that as one of their warning signs. It's hilarious.
I got to get to Florida. It's on another level, isn't it? The stories you hear.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome being out here, but sometimes it's scary too, especially being born and raised Arizonan from Texas. It's just there's stuff out here that I've never had to deal with before in my life, and so I got a constant paranoia. We've taken our kids walking out through the parks, and you're constantly like, don't leave the path. I don't know what's over there. There could be a cottonmouth. There could be a rattlesnake. Don't leave the path. Stay here. I want them to explore, but then at the same time, you're like, if they explore, they could die. So you got to stay put. One of the things I really want to find is coral snakes. Oh, you're good.
Oh, 100%. They're brilliant.
I've never found a coral snake in my entire life, and so that's one of the main snakes I really want to find while we're living here. But don't know. Never know. So, all right, I will say we do have to cut the podcast off. I got to get home, and it's getting sunset, so my camera's not going to be working here in a minute anyway. But it was awesome having you on and hearing some stories, especially from a country as of Australia, because everyone hears about Australia when it comes to wildlife and adventures. So thanks for coming on and sharing some of your stories.
Oh, thanks for having me, Daniel. That's brilliant. Oh, you've got such an exciting life over there. It's epic. I'll keep track of everything, but we have to catch up one day. But yeah.
All right, well, thanks. Have a good one, man.
Thanks, mate. I'll see you next time. See ya.
All right, everyone. That's it for this podcast. And if you're watching, you can tell the sun is setting. So I do got to call it quits. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast with Brandon as much as I did, hearing some of his amazing stories of being a zookeeper in Australia and being a herpetologist in Australia as well. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and I will see you on the next podcast.